Welcome to another episode of FGC Behind the Smoke. I'm your co-host, Boris.
And I'm your other co-host, Adamo.
Adamo, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're going to talk about red flags in an interview.
Yeah, big things that might come up during the interview panel that the recruiters will have either further questions for you on or will just outright write you off.
Yeah.
Okay, so first one here, pretty straightforward, big gaps in work history.
Yeah, absolutely, right? If you have big gaps in your work history, they're going to wonder why, right? Sometimes, people go traveling for like long periods of time, right? There's plenty of people who, have backpacked across Europe over a year and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. So if you have gaps in your work history and that's the reason why, you just need to be able to explain that. If it's like, oh, well, I just couldn't find a job or whatever, that's obviously going to be a red flag.
Yeah, pretty straightforward on that one. If you have huge gaps in your work history, you're going to have to be able to explain it.
Yeah.
If you can't, expect some kind of negative feedback from the interview panel.
Big gaps in your work history is obviously going to be something that they're going to want to know about. So when they see that, they're definitely going to have questions for you about that, right? Like, why were you not working for 2 years, right? Like, what were you doing in that meantime, right? And you want to be able to tell them that you were doing something to like better yourself. Maybe you were, volunteering in Africa or whatever, right? Or traveling. Like, those are positive things, right? Mm-hmm. But if it's just because like, oh, you know what, I just decided to take 2 years off work and, I live with my parents and, I don't have to pay any bills. Well, I mean, that's kind of going to show, one, your maturity level, and two, just that you don't prioritize
bettering yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a big thing with firefighting, right? We always strive to be better, drill when we feel like we're worse at something than we were a year ago.
Yeah.
Right. So when they see that big gap, they want to know what else you were doing in that time. And there's nothing wrong with traveling for a year. You're learning different cultures, you're learning different languages, you're, customer service, meeting people. It's just
totally
the way you talk about it matters.
Absolutely. Right? And I think that doing that is a huge benefit, right? Like going mm-hmm. traveling and, like you said, experiencing other cultures, having to be accountable for yourself and what you're doing, and shows that you're able to plan and all that kind of stuff, right? But mm-hmm. you need to be able to explain why there's gaps in your work history.
Yeah, and just another note on that, a lot of people do travel. When you go on a call, you don't know what kind of house you're going to step into. That person could be from Asia, Africa, Europe, right? Anywhere. So, knowing different cultures and having that benefit is huge in the fire service, and being able to relate to that person that's called for help.
Absolutely. It goes a long way, right? Mm-hmm. But like we were saying, if you do have gaps in your work history, you have to be able to explain why.
Totally. The second point here is basically the opposite of that. Short stints at multiple jobs. So if your resume shows you've worked at one place for 3 months, and then right after that you worked at another place for half a year, so forth.
Yeah, and that's going to be a red flag for sure, right? They're definitely going to have questions about that. Why have you been bouncing around from job to job, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have issues with getting along with people, and that's why you constantly move from job to job? Do you give up easily? They're going to have a lot of questions about that. And in a way, I would say that's almost more detrimental sometimes than having like a gap in your work history.
Yeah, I agree. I've only seen positives on that from, say, like students, who can only work one semester or half a semester and then get back to their studies. Other than that, having short stints and multiple jobs is very difficult to justify.
Yeah.
So if you are one of those people whose resume looks like that, just be ready for those questions from the interview panel.
Absolutely.
Third point here, talking negatively about past employer. I think we've spoken about this in previous episodes.
Yeah, I think we have. And you know what? Like it doesn't go over well mm-hmm. at all, right? Because it's kind of going to come across like you're blaming everybody else, right? Like mm-hmm. you're blaming your employers or whatever, right? Whereas they want to know that you're able to hold yourself accountable and not just pass the blame on to other people.
Yeah, and you got to think about it from a logical point too. That employer, paid you for a service, for a job. They essentially took you under their wing in a way. You don't want to be speaking negatively about them, even if there was some kind of conflict, right? You leaving that job, there was something that you didn't like about that job.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Everybody understands that.
Totally. Everyone understands that. And I think a lot of people have that experience at one job in their life, but really you need to be able to like answer that in a positive way and not just, put blame on people, right?
Yeah. So that kind of goes into our next point here, poor answers on conflict resolution.
They're looking at if you're going to be a problem, essentially, right? When they ask these conflict resolution questions. How do you resolve conflict? Are you going to be someone who, flies off the handle and gets upset? Or are you going to be somebody who's going to be able to handle conflict and solve it in a professional, respectful manner?
Yeah. Take that person aside, tell them your side of the story, be empathetic to their side.
Yeah.
Right. There's always ways to do this. And interview panel questions usually are, conflict with a supervisor, conflict with a coworker, conflict with a subordinate, a conflict that hasn't been resolved. So you have to be ready for those. And again, you have to be respectful, not just for the interview panel, but just in the way that you approach conflict.
Exactly. Right. Because they don't want to hire someone who's going to be a hothead, right? They want to hire someone who's going to be able to, if there is an issue, be able to have that one-on-one conversation with someone in a respectful way. And like you said, be empathetic towards their side of the story as well, right?
Yeah, totally. And that again goes into the next one here, past unsafe, unlawful, and unethical conduct. So just a quick story here. I actually had this candidate at the interview panel. We asked him a question that was like, what did you do that you didn't agree with or whatever? And he's like, yeah, I just, went up on a roof with no harness and my employer didn't like that. And I had an issue with the employer not liking that. And
yeah, that doesn't go over
well. It's
well.
like, so you chose to be unsafe and your employer tried to keep you safe and alive and you didn't want to deal with that.
Yeah. That just kind of shows your maturity level too, right?
Exactly. And again, if you were like that with your previous employer, are you going to be like that in the fire service?
Yeah, and they don't want to hire someone who's going to be reckless either, right? Like, yes, firefighting has its hazards and it can be a dangerous job. That potential's there, but they don't want to hire someone who's going to purposely put themselves in harm's way trying to, be a cowboy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's not just you on that fire truck. You have 3 other guys or people who have families back home and who want to get to them safely, right?
Yeah, exactly. And by you doing something reckless, you're potentially putting everyone else at harm, right?
Okay, so those are kind of our big red flags that you should watch out for in a panel interview. But we'd also like to go over some orange flags with you guys. So these are kind of obviously similar to red flags, but it's something that might be seen on your resume in your interview as a potential for a red flag, but the recruiters need more context on it.
Yeah.
So we're calling it the orange flag.
Yeah, this is just something where, like you said, it's the potential to be a red flag, but they want the context because it could also be something positive, right? So you have to be able to provide that context for them to show them that it isn't an issue.
Yeah. Unlike the red flags, which is basically damage control, orange flags is providing that context.
Yeah.
Cool. So the first one we have on here as an orange flag is being self-employed for a very long time.
Some people are probably wondering why would that be an orange flag, right? It has the potential to be a green flag, right? Something that's really, you demonstrate that you're able to manage people or manage, time management and be able to work under stress and whatever, right?
Totally.
But what are some ways that it could also be an orange flag?
For me, it can be you haven't taken direction from somebody higher on the food chain.
Yeah.
You've always been your own boss. You don't take directions from anybody. You kind of beat to your own drum.
Right. Yeah.
So, and it happens, I know guys that have been self-employed for 20 years and then they start applying for the fire service. Like you said, nothing wrong with that. It's a green flag. Wow. You've been able to sustain yourself all these years.
Yeah.
That's great. But can this person now go into a position where they take orders from a 21-year-old?
Yeah, exactly. I think we talked about this in a previous episode as well, but you do have to understand that when you get into the fire service, there is that chain of command, right? So it doesn't matter if you're the CEO of some huge company and you decided you want to be a firefighter. Well, nobody cares that you were the CEO of some company. You're starting at the bottom, right? So you kind of got to know your place. And you got to be able to put your ego aside and just recognize that, hey, I'm the new guy here now. I have to prove myself. Not the other way around, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it happens all the time. In the fire service, somebody will be more senior, but then we go and maybe do a job together on the side, and now I'm the boss or whatever, right? Like
the roles are reversed.
The roles are reversed, and it happens all the time. So you have to remove the ego from it and understand what your job is at that specific place and do the job and do it well.
Yeah, exactly.
So expect some more context on that if you're self-employed or you have been self-employed for a long time. The next one we have on here is past high-intensity jobs.
Yeah, such as like military, police, paramedic, that kind of stuff. The reason why it can be an orange flag is because they might be wondering, well, what kind of trauma might you be bringing on in this role, right? Do you already have mental health issues from the previous job that you haven't dealt with, right? Kind of like the backpack analogy, right? Like your bag already full?
Yeah, and that was a great analogy that was brought on when we talked to Will last episode.
Yeah.
Right? Having all that baggage on your back and finally getting into the fire service, and now you're taking on even more.
Yeah, exactly. So you're going to have to be able to explain how you were able to mitigate the stressors of this previous job that you had and how it's not going to affect you, in the current role as a firefighter.
Yeah, like you said earlier, that green flag, being in a military, police, or ambulance service before firefighting is a great green flag.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Lots of good things from it, right? But there's also that orange flag. Well, is this person already, physically and emotionally and mentally drained from that job?
Right, exactly, yeah.
The next one we have on here as an orange flag is lack of tool, labor, or trade experience.
Yeah, so for those of you listening, I kind of like to relate firefighting sometimes to a trade. As a tradesperson, you start off as a first-year apprentice, not knowing anything, and you work your way up in your knowledge and in your education and all that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the same thing with the fire service, right? You start as a recruit,
and
then you become a probationer, and then you kind of work your way up to first class, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have experience in a trade or like working a physically strenuous job or tool knowledge, well, those are all very relatable to the fire service.
Mm-hmm.
And they're probably going to ask you some questions about your mechanical aptitude, your ability to work physically, right? Like if you say you worked in finance before, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you never had that physical labor job, they might have questions about that, right? Like, are you aware that this is a very physically demanding job?
Totally. And like you said, if you're in a cubicle at a finance office your whole life, you're not experiencing the cold, the wet, all the crappy things about weather when you're outside, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And again, the interview panel just wants to know that you are able to handle it. They're not saying you can't, but they want you to show proof that this is that you understand what you're getting into and you're going to be able to work with those tools in that environment.
Totally. And like when it comes to the tools too, like those are things that you can learn, right? Like, so even if you did work in a cubicle before and you don't have any trade experience or tool experience, you can learn that stuff, but you have to be able to demonstrate that you have that attitude to be able to learn and be able to work hard and all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, like go to a Home Depot and find some poor worker there and just get them to take you through all the tools in the building. What does this one do? What is this? Oh, can I try it?
But you know what though? That is a good point though, because like you can rent tools and stuff like that from Home Depot or some of these other tool rental companies where you can be like, you know what? I don't know anything about a chainsaw.
Yeah. I'm
going to go rent a chainsaw. I'm going to watch a YouTube video on how to sharpen the chain, how to use the decompression button, all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So if you can demonstrate that and be like, yeah, you know what, I worked in finance since I got out of high school, but you know what, knowing that it's so important to be able to work with tools, you know, I went to Home Depot, I rented this tool, I rented that tool, and, I was able to like teach myself.
Yeah, exactly. The recruiters will love that. Oh, wow, this person understands their weakness and they're working on it.
Yeah.
No different than if you're like, oh, you know what, I'm bad at computers, so I downloaded Microsoft Excel and I was trying a couple of things.
Yeah. Is that a shot at me?
No.
I'm so bad with computers.
But the thing is, like, I've seen you now with, with the podcast here, like you're crushing it with some of those tools.
Yeah, it's been a learning curve for sure, but I've been able to, figure it out. And
you take it head on, you understand what the weakness is, right? And you work on it. That's the fire service.
I can now use Microsoft Excel. So
press enter.
Yeah.
It's a big button. Okay, next one we have on here as an orange flag is huge career changes. So, for example, going from something like being an actor or librarian to the fire service.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, the polar opposite, right? So they're going to probably wonder, do you know what you're getting into? Like your past job and your past work history, your past education doesn't really have anything to do with the fire service, right? So they might have questions on, okay, well, you were a librarian, working with books and all that kind of stuff. Well, now you're going to be doing the complete opposite, right? So how have you prepared for that?
Yeah. And again, nothing wrong with being a librarian. There's tons of things that could transfer over or whatever your job before was, if it was a polar opposite, but you have to be able to find those things and talk about them, right?
Yeah.
Well, my, language understanding, and I understand multiple languages, or I understand, order and putting things in the right number. Or
customer service.
Exactly. So again, it's just the way that you articulate your position that's going to make that orange flag into a green one.
Yeah, exactly.
The next one we have is lack of team sports or jobs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, right? Like we preach it all the time. Firefighting is a team effort, right? We constantly say it at work, everything's team, right? So if you don't have experience within that team atmosphere, they're going to have questions about that. Like, are you going to be able to work as a cohesive member of this team, right? There's ways that you can demonstrate that throughout your life though, right? Like, even with your family, like you guys are a team, right? Like you need to be able to provide examples on how you've been able to effectively work in a team environment.
Yeah. And if you realize that that's one of the gaps in your work profile or your history, go join like a sports team, like a rec soccer team or something, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Get that experience and go from there. The last one we have on here is pay cut, big move, or taking a demotion to become a firefighter.
Yeah, for sure, right? And, there's quite a few people who get hired on and they take a massive pay cut to become a firefighter, right? So they might have questions about that in regards to, are you aware that you're taking this huge pay cut, right? Yeah. Are you going to be able to sustain your current lifestyle, off of being a firefighter?
Yeah, because the recruiting panel wants you to succeed and do well. They don't want to see you taking on 4 jobs during your probation because you didn't realize how little money you made.
Exactly.
Or you can't keep up to the lifestyle that you had before.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Big moves as well. If you've moved across the entire country to be here, well, do you understand that maybe the prices of homes are different, or that have you already lived here enough to know that this is the place you want to live?
Yeah.
All right.
Because they might be wondering too, like, are you going to leave? Right? You get hired, in Toronto, but you're from Alberta, right? They're going to wonder like, okay, well, that's a pretty big move. It's a big change of life. Are you going to end up leaving and going back to Alberta? Yeah. Right? They might wonder that.
Which is a fair assessment by the interview panel. They would like to know your intentions.
For sure, because they want to hire someone that's going to stick around, right?
Yeah. Let's say it's a more polarizing place. Like you came from Florida and now you're working in Alaska. They might have questions. Are you ready for, minus 30 weather and catching a hydrant in that weather?
Exactly, yeah.
Right. So just be ready for that. If you did make a big move to be at the interview panel of a city where you just got to, be ready.
Yeah, just be ready for them to ask you those types of questions, right?
And yeah, demotions. I mean, I know guys that have owned businesses, and again, goes back to that first one, being self-employed for a very long time. And they leave that job to become firefighters and start at the bottom again. And
exactly, yeah. Just like we said earlier, like you just need to be aware that doesn't matter what job you had before, whether you're, the CEO or the foreman or whatever, when you get into the fire service, you're starting at the bottom and you're working your way up.
So if you guys have any questions on any of those red flags, orange flags, give us a shout. We actually have some pretty exciting news today as well.
We do.
So we have just created our Patreon program and it's online. We'll put a link in the description of this episode. It's got all our freebies on there. So it's got resume templates, the interview checklist,
the competitive edge checklist.
Yeah, competitive edge checklist.
And we're also going to be diving into more in-depth interview episodes and hiring process stuff. And we're going to be posting it on there. It really does help us out because then we're able to pay Francesco for producing this podcast. If it wasn't for him, we'd be hooped.
You guys missed the part where we were just trying to turn this microphone on before this episode.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we wouldn't be anywhere without him. So we'd like to start paying him a lot more.
And it's also going to be a way for us to just upgrade to better audio equipment, better cameras, better lighting, and all that kind of stuff to bring you guys a better experience with this podcast.
Yeah, and that was your idea actually, Dan, with the whole going over every interview question kind of in depth and really getting into the interview panel stuff.
Yeah, we'll be going into that in really great detail, really breaking apart the questions and just talking about like what they're actually asking in these questions, right? And yeah, it's going to be good. It's going to be a lot of info, a lot of really, really good info.
And if it's not, let us know. We also have a chat group in there as well on Patreon.
That's right.
So if there's, guests you want us to see, bring on, or if there's questions you want us to ask or talk about on the podcast, you're more than welcome to ask us on there.
Yeah, for sure. And like when it comes to those behavioral / situational type questions, we can break down a question and talk about it for probably half an hour. Yeah. Right. Just one question.
Easily.
So there's going to be a lot of really good info on that. And like we said, it's going to really help support the podcast so we can upgrade better equipment and also keep Francesco around so that way there is a podcast.
Chaining him down to the table would be too cruel.
Yeah. Right on.
Hey everyone, we just wanted to take a moment quickly to thank our sponsors.
Our first sponsor is CanCon Construction. CanCon is located in Abbotsford, BC. CanCon specializes in heavy machinery for construction sites, such as backhoes, excavators, and so on. If you're looking to gain experience, or if you already have experience as an equipment operator and you're looking for a new place to work, we highly suggest CanCon Construction. They're one of the best in the business, and they treat their employees like gold. So check them out. You can look at their website at canconconstruction.com. The next sponsor we'd like to thank is Strike Recovery and Performance. Strike is located in Burnaby, BC. They provide physio, chiropractor, and RMTs. I've been personally going to Strike for a few years now, so it's really awesome that they've decided to sponsor our podcast. I've gone to other chiros and physios before, and nothing compares to Strike. Their head chiropractor was actually a chiropractor for the UFC for quite a while, so they have a lot of experience dealing with professional athletes. And as firefighters, you have the potential of getting injured, and they're the people to go see.
Thanks, Francesco, for everything.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys. Like, subscribe, share, and we'll chat with you guys soon.
Take care.